Let's start over. Members, I call the meeting to order. Item 1. Information paper issued since the last meeting. The Secretariat has issued no information paper since the last meeting. Item 2. Items for discussion at the next meeting. In December, our regular meeting will be held on the 2nd of December. That's Monday at 2:30 p.m. At that meeting, we will discuss 2 items. First, HAT 711 project number B090TI, public transport interchange at Shengshui areas 4 and 30, Site 1, Phase 2. And second, proposed regulatory regime on basic housing units. So a question for members. Are we all good for those 2 items for the next meeting? All good? So let's move on to item 3. That's a briefing by the Secretary for Housing on the Chief Executive's 2024 policy address. We first welcome the Secretary for Housing and her team, who will be joining us. Let's first invite the officials to join us. Welcome. We have the Secretary and her team joining us for the meeting. So we first invite the Secretary to walk us through measures under the policy address on housing. The Secretary has slides for her presentation. Over to you, Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. I also thank the members here. So I will briefly go over the measures of our Bureau with slides. I will go over the housing-related measures from last year's and this year's policy address. As members are well aware of the measures, so I will be brief. Over the past couple of years, we have done much on housing to boost quantity, quality, speed, efficiency. Now we have 30,000 light public housing units. In the next 5 years, starting 2025 to 26, public housing supply will reach 189,000 units. You compare that with the 5-year period when the current term government started in 2022 to 23, the supply is now up 80%. The waiting time for public housing has also fallen by half a year. The peak was 6.1 years, now it's fallen to 5.5 years. On transitional housing, we already have 17,900 transitional housing units in service. Some units are now doing their second intake. The latest figures show the usage rate for some units is 144%. Now, for light public housing, we will have 30,000 units. The first phase, 2,100 units, Yao Pok Road in Yuen Long. The intake will happen in the first quarter next year. That project is scheduled, will look set to complete on schedule. People will be able to move in on time. As at the end of October this year, we received 11,700 applications for 4,400 slots. So that's an overwhelming response. Now, on relaxing the criteria for subsidized sale flat, for the secondary market HOS, we propose extending the mortgage default guarantee period from 30 to 50 years. The mortgage repayment period will also be extended. From March to July this year, we recorded an average of 500 transactions per month. In the past year, the monthly average was 230 cases, so we more than doubled the transaction volume. Now, on the advanced allocation schemes, there are 2 estates, Chongqing Estate, Yiphuang Estate, altogether 2,000 families manage to move in 5 to 9 months in advance. On average, we save these families $50 million in rent. For housing estates soon to be completed, there's also advanced allocation in Fu Tip Estate, Chongqing Estate, Hin Fat Estate, and Yip Wong Estate. Advanced allocation has started, and that covers around 10,300 units. For families with newborns, last year's policy address proposed a families with newborn flat allocation scheme. As said, September this year, 2,300 eligible PRH applications had their waiting time reduced by 1 year. Now, as for SSFs, there is also the Families with Newborns Flat Selection Priority Scheme. Starting from the HOS or Homes Ownership Scheme, Flats Exercise 2024, this priority scheme has kicked in for that sale exercise. Now, for modular integrated transaction, our target is to have at least half the project adopting MIC starting from next year. 20 public housing projects have adopted MIC for public housing flats. So where we can, we try to adopt MIC for projects as early as we can. Design and build, the same principle applies. The goal is to have at least half the projects adopting design and build starting from 2028 to 29. But we already have some projects now adopting. Some projects have already seen their tender awarded, while others are still going through the tendering. Quality also matters. We want to enhance the public sense of well-being. This September, we rolled out the well-being design. For housing estates old and new, they will follow the well-being design guidelines. There are 8 concepts: health and vitality, green living and sustainability, age-friendliness, intergenerational and inclusive living, family and community connection, urban integration, upward mobility, and perception and image. Now, coming to the 2024 policy address. Again, we have many housing-related measures. First, tackling the issue of subdivided units or SDUs. Substandard SDUs are a long-standing, big and tough issue. There was a time when we were short of housing. So some residential units were subdivided and then rented out. The current term government rolled out a number of measures to boost quantity, quality, and efficiency. So that has given us confidence to tackle this housing issue. We have found enough land for housing for the next 10 years. 30,000 light public housing units and 21,000 transitional housing units help us meet that housing gap. We have this task force on tackling the issue of SDUs headed by the Deputy Financial Secretary. I am the Deputy Chair of that task force. We submitted a report to the Chief Executive. In this year's policy address, you can see a proposal to set up a registration system for SDUs through legislation. For units that meet the standards, they will be known as basic housing units. Only BHUs can be rented out in the future. For units that fall short of the standards, conversion works are needed. Landlords have to hire professionals to confirm the compliance of these units with the new standards. Otherwise, the landlords will be held criminally liable. Here, the tenants will not be held criminally liable. We propose creating a registration system. So for BHUs with registration and confirmation, those units will be in the system. New subdivided units will have to meet the standards of the BHUs before those units can be rented out. Now, with public housing supply, substandard SDUs will be gradually phased out. For BHUs, we are looking at the minimum standards. The floor area cannot be smaller than 8 square meters. Headroom, fire safety, structural safety, ventilation, separate washrooms, and separate water and power meters. Those are areas that we want to include in the minimum standards. Now, on the timetable, we will make every effort on this. Next month, early December, we will brief electrical members at this panel. Once we get the members' views, we will go ahead with the public consultation from December to February next year, and then we will report the findings to electrical. Depending on the outcome of the consultation, we will submit the bill to electrical. We will try to get that legislation passed in 2025. Now, on the overall public housing supply in the next 5 years, I have covered that. When the current term government just started, we had fewer supply. Now the supply is up 80%. I now turn to light public housing. All works contracts have been awarded. Now let's look at the Yaopok Road project in Yunlong. All the modules have been completed. We're now working on the surroundings, so that project will be completed next year. We are also enhancing the housing ladder to meet the public's home ownership aspirations. So we propose changing the ratio of public housing to SSFs. We will shift that ratio from 70 to 30 now to 60-40. Public rental housing to SSFs. Now, for applicants who fail to buy subsidized sale flats for 2 times in a row, when people apply for the same category of SSFs and they fail 2 times in a row, they get an extra ballot number. Home ownership for young people, starting from the next white form Excel exercise, young buyers and young family buyers and young singleton buyers will get an extra ballot number. The extra 1,500 places under the WSM scheme will all go to applicants aged below 40. Now I turn to the wealthy tenant policy. So we're considering plans along the lines of lowering the income limit and raising the additional rent. We want to speed up the turnover of units occupied by wealthy tenants so that the units can go to people who need them. We also want to propose adjusting the ratio of green form to white form units from 40-60 to 50-50. We want more people to buy the subsidized sale flats. Now, combating tenancy abuse. The results have been impressive. Over the past 2 years, we recovered 5,000 units. That's equivalent to a medium-sized housing estate, so the results were great. Starting from January next year, we propose rolling out the Cherished Public Housing Resources Award Scheme. When people come to us with tip-off that helps us recover units, we will be able to recover more units subject to tenancy abuse. For smart estate management, we have picked 10 housing estates where we will pilot new technology, such as IoT-based sensor systems and also AI-based systems. Starting from next year, we will set up a centralized estate management platform where we will gather data to enhance management efficiency and quality. Now, for new buildings, we will set up a project information management and analytics platform. So the data will have to link up with that platform so that we can adopt digital management of projects. We will have 3D maps and this virtual digital models to raise project efficiency. On technological research, we will work with research bodies. That's NAMI, Nanomaterials Research Institute. So this means we will make use of the second generation MIC. This will streamline procedures and that will lead to faster assembling of modules. Starting from 2028 to 29 to 32 to 33, at least half of those projects will adopt MIC, and those will be second-generation MIC technologies. We will also encourage the wider adoption of construction robotics to raise efficiency and enhance worker safety. In tender documents, we will also include statements on the use of robotics. We just announced the study on redeveloping Choi Hong Estate. The work ahead will include Waffle Estate, And then within 2025, we will also announce the outcomes for the studies for Sai Wan Estate and Matawai Estate.
There's a lot of renovation and maintenance work to be done, and we could arrange a scale so that there would be increased in tendering opportunities for contractors of different scales. We would also employ different subcontractors. We have launched the Well-being Startup Program to encourage young people to start their businesses in some private shopping arcades, and we are trying to expand the scale so that more people or more landlords in the commercial sector can assist the young people in starting their business. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary. I now open up the floor for questions. Let me first read out the list of members wishing to speak. Ms. Wendy Hong, Mr. Dominic Lee, Mr. Vincent Chang, Dr. Lo Wai Kwok, Dr. Dick Chi Yun, Mr. Chen Hock Fong, Mr. So Chang Wing, Mr. Andrew Lam, Ms. Carmen Ken, Mr. Gary Zhang, and I myself. So that's 4 minutes each. Ms. Wendy Hong, please. I have 3 questions. First of all, in the next 10 years, we are going to adjust the ratio of private public housing. So actually, so from 7.3 to 6.4, it is so in. Are we going to start to adjust it now, or do we have to wait till 10 years? Because we hope that we'll see it in 5 to 7 years. The Secretary said that there's going to be about 7,000 public housing units per year. So what's the supply for each year? That's the first question. The second question is about the redevelopment of Choi Hong Estate. This estate is in Wong Tai Sin. If figures are correct, there are about 70% people in Wong Tai Sin district living in public housing. So with redevelopment, we can see that there's actually low upscale mobility and an aging population in Wong Tai Sin district. When we are redeveloping the area, would we actually leave part of it for HOS to allow people to have upscale mobility? Third question, we only about 50.4% people live in self-financed units, but so we are behind Australia 69 and many other countries. Well, so young people, especially, we see a lower percentage. Those 30 years or younger, actually, from 1997, there's about 21.1% living in our own housing. Would you actually consider setting up a percentage, including young people also purchasing their own units? Thank you. Secretary, so you are actually stating why we are going to within the ratio of public housing, that is from the PRH to SSF from 7.3 to 6.4. So we see that there's actually a lot of people who want to own their own property. So we want to provide a more affordable housing for young people. So we actually are looking towards the from the current ratio from PRH and SSF from 70-30 to 60-40. Well, some of them are in the building. We know that some of the HOS have already been sold, we are going to follow the current plan. At the same time, we're also going to look towards the next 5 years, from the 5th to the 10th year. What kind of projects would be suitable for PRH? We are gradually going to reach the ratio of 60-40. We are now actually considering the projects on hand. The 60-40 ratio is our goal. In the next 5 years, there would be around 45,000 PRH units, and also some from the housing society. So there would be enough supply in housing. In order to encourage young people, we have also rolled out measures such as providing an extra ballot to enhance their opportunities in getting a PRH. In Choi Hong Estate, as to whether we are able to provide SSF, our colleagues are now looking into the planning, and we thank you for your suggestions. We're going to consider it carefully. In the nearby vicinity of Choi Hong Estate, we are also providing GSH, and so we are going to consider other urban areas at the same time as well. Thank you. Mr. Dominic Lee. Thank you. Well, we are a very developed city, yet many of the grassroots families live in dire environment, such as in subdivided units. So this time, with the rolling out of basic housing units, our party is of full support. In Hong Kong, there are around 110,000 SDU units, and many of them have low income. They are not able to afford high rent. Now you're requiring landlords to renovate the units to meet certain standards. Would they be able to do that? Would the government provide subsidy to help the landlords to make this change? You're also requiring an area of not less than 80 square feet. Can the tenants afford the rent? And as you said, you're going to set up a grace period, but there is no detailed timetable. Would you actually flexibly extend the grace period? Because there are reports saying that some landlords are now renovating the SDUs in advance, and tenants are forced to move out. How are you going to handle this situation? The basic requirement for BHUs is to have a window and a toilet with a partition. So for some of the older buildings, it's very difficult to comply to such requirements. Would the government provide some sort of a technical support, or actually make changes due to the technical difficulties in some of the older buildings? Secretary. Thank you. Well, according to our survey, the number of 100,000 is not a number across the board for all SDUs. We see many that are living in units larger than 8 square meters. Some of them are even 10 square meters. Some of them are actually quite well equipped. That's why we have come up with the suggestion of the basic housing units, that at least it can actually comply with certain requirements and at the same time meet the needs of people. When the landlord partition out the units for rent, then actually they receive a higher rent. Therefore, the landlord should actually shoulder some of the expenses. We see about 90% of the SDUs have windows. Only some of them would need to see larger changes. As for the headroom, is it 2.3 meters? Maybe only about 10% or less than 10% of them do not comply to this standard. Well, as long as the landlord is willing to make renovations to meet the requirements, we believe that that would be feasible. We would like to take your suggestions for the grace period. Should it be 1 year or 1.5 years? We would like to see a longer grace period because some landlords, after registering for the SDUs, may need some more time to complete the renovations. We want to provide ample time for the landlords and want to ensure that there would be adequate supply of BHUs with adjustment made to the rent. I've already given you the figures on the requirements of the BHUs. As I said, less than 10% of the existing SDUs do not have windows. It's not difficult to partition out a window. We're talking about one window, not 6 to 7 windows in one room. Thank you. Mr. Vincent Cheng. Well, there's a lot of work to be carried out from the housing side this year. Well, in the past, we have seen transitional housing, and also with the light public housing, we're talking about 50,000 units, and therefore we actually are in support of the new requirements for the housing units. I'd like to ask about the tenancy control. Some landlords have requested their tenants to leave, but there should be an agreement made under the tenancy control. In the past, there have been 400 cases with about 1 million in penalty. So how are you going to handle such unscrupulous landlords? Are you going to ensure that tenants would have more protection? Secretary, thank you. We are also very concerned with this issue. And here I would like to state clearly to tenants that they are protected under the tenancy control. Any landlord who is not complying with the tenancy control, you can lodge a complaint to us. You can raise this issue even in the community living room, because people would know how to help you. About 400 landlords have been prosecuted because of this. We continue to see landlords breaching this rule. The Landlord and Tenant Consolidation Ordinance took effect on January 22nd, 2022, and in the year 2023, we have seen an increase of 36% in number of cases, and in 2024 we see a rising number. We hope that you would bring this to our attention. If you see that the situation at the SDU is extremely dire and you're not on good relationship with the owner, can actually come to us to apply for transitional housing. There are actually options in the urban area for such housing. And then for those under category B in the application for PRH, there are about 12 projects that has opened up more options for Cat B, and there are going to be more in the future as well.
Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. The government has proposed pragmatic measures to address subdivided units. On different occasions in the past, I said this time and again. Not everyone could afford to rent or buy their home. That's why subdivided units appeared. So the point is to address the substandard SDUs. Now, we now see standards about BHUs, 8 square meters in size. There are requirements in ventilation and fire safety. That's the standards proposed by the government. From news reports, I noticed that there are people living in substandard SDUs. These people say they do not qualify for public rental housing. But these people cannot afford the future BHUs. Say, singleton males, they would rather rent a bed space for a lower rent. So how do we fix this problem? That's my first question. Now, for light public housing units, with the concerted effort involving different parties, including the engineering sector, the projects are moving at pace. The first intake will happen soon. LPH units are built with MIC. But such LPH flats come with many stories, and there is concrete involved. So LPH flats are supposed to have a longer shelf life. So has the government looked at the land in terms of the length of use? Can we lengthen the years of use for LPH flats? Can we use LPH flats as like regular public rental flats? Because that would avoid waste. Some argue you put LPH flats there and then a few years later you tear the flats down. That would be a waste. And it's challenging to reuse some modules. That would require care. So that's why I raised my question. On December the 2nd, that will be our next regular meeting. We will have an item specifically on BHUs. I can see this matter is close to the heart of many members. So now over to the Secretary. On Dr. Lo's first question, if people have housing needs, there are transitional housing units, there will be light public housing units. We see more SDU residents who are in a household of 1 to 2 members. Transitional housing units are a good alternative. And when people qualify, they're welcome to apply for light public housing in the future. It's all about the demand and supply. That's why, for the grace period of basic housing units, we prefer a longer grace period, say towards the end of 2028 or 2029. At that point, we will have even more public housing supply. Once you have ample supply and then you factor in light public housing and transitional housing, people with housing needs will get a range of options. And at that point, rents are unlikely to rise sharply. Now, on light public housing, the flats will be built with MIC. The same applies for the lift lobbies. In multi-story buildings, there will be concrete structures as well. So far, we haven't found a long-term use for light public housing flats. We will try to use those flats for as long as we can. We will talk to the relevant policy bureaus about the long-term land use. But we're open to the idea of keeping the light public housing units for longer. Next, Dr. Tik Chi-yun. This is not my first time making this point. The Secretary is a capable official, and our officials have taken resolute action. We recovered so many units, they're equivalent to a housing estate. So we have a capable secretary and permanent secretary here. Now, I want to turn to speed. The government has found enough land for public housing supply for the next 10 years, and we may even have a surplus of land. So now we have to build fast. More people will be able to benefit. People will get housed faster with a shorter waiting time. But then there are people also criticizing the government for falling behind the private sector in building flats. So can our two competent officials tell us, for building public housing in the next 10 years, how fast can we go in building public flats? Can we get a pledge from you? You build faster, more people can benefit. So that's my question. How fast can you go? Now, I turn to SDUs. I support fixing this problem. Now, we will have BHUs. There will be standards. Units need windows. But the public will foot the bill. The people affected will be people on the lowest income. They will get bigger BHUs. BHUs will be bigger than current SDUs with windows. But the rents will surely go up. For landlords, they get more money by subdividing their units. Now, since landlords get more money, how do we strike a balance? Tenants can access a better flat, but they will have to pay more. But what about the responsibility of the landlords? Should we set a starting rent? Should we have some form of rent control so that people can afford the flats? Otherwise, the costs go up, the rents go up, the people in the greatest need cannot benefit. Now, we will discuss BHUs at the next meeting. So here are my two suggestions. First, can we consider a starting rent? Since we are trying to fix SDUs and propose BHUs, issues come up. The grassroots struggle to stand up for their rights. The secretary said there are social workers at community living rooms, but please understand that social workers already have their plates full. Can we have dedicated social workers on SDU-related issues? In Hongshouqiu, Kutong, there are teams of social workers with the people affected. So when we come to SDUs, issues are bound to come up. So a dedicated team of social workers will be helpful. One of the slides says young people can benefit from an entrepreneurship scheme. Now, smaller NGOs need space to deliver their services. These NGOs don't need busy areas. They just need a space to help the vulnerable groups. So can we give some thought to this idea of giving space to NGOs? Secretary. Thank you. I would take Dr. Tik's first question about building flats. We are moving towards MIC 2.0. We're working with NAMI, Nanomaterials Research Institute. We want to have fewer temporary support structures with thinner walls We try to move faster in the lifting and assembling of containers. We can now build more with less time over time. So we go one step at a time in streamlining the process and building faster. I also mentioned a faster allocation scheme. More than 2,000 units have been allocated to people under this advanced allocation scheme. Before 2027 to 28, there will be an extra 10,000 units for people to be housed 3 to 18 months in advance. This works because we are working with the CEDD, Civil Engineering and Development Department. In the past, the CEDD would give us one plot at a time. But now, the CEDD is giving us a plot of land as soon as it is ready. And we are also working more on phased delivery of flats. So I can reassure Dr. Tick that we take this very seriously. I also thank Dr. Tick for his recognition. The permanent secretary is working with me, and we have the entire team at the Housing Bureau. The work is on our mind every day. Now, I turn to BHUs. I want to share some figures. 110,000 SDUs right now, roughly 30,000 units fall short of standards. That will require extra resources for renovation. But that also means 70,000 units are basically up to standard. They may just need a smoke detector. Those units already have a window, a separate washroom. Those units will require minor works to become BHUs. Let's look at the residents. 110,000 residents. 40,000 such residents may not qualify for public rental housing flats. But we're talking about 70,000 units for 40,000 tenants. So rents are unlikely to jump because of the supply. We have given much thought to a starting rent. Many people have proposed that. Tenants worry about rising rents, so they favor a starting rent. But then, when a subdivided unit has a starting rent, some people argue for $2,000 on a par with PRH flats for SDU rent. That may sound like a good news to tenants, but then for landlords, they would simply drop the idea of offering BHUs. Landlords would rather rent out the entire unit as a whole. So that becomes the other worry of the public, because a starting rent would shrink the supply of basic housing needs, and that will leave more people with housing needs homeless, because those people won't be able to access BHUs. So this idea of a starting rent appears to be helpful, but it may be counterproductive. Something we don't want to see may happen, and that is a fall in the supply of BHUs. So we have to be very careful in approaching this matter. Now, on the well-being startup program, I note Dr. Tick's suggestion, so we will give thought to his suggestion. A reminder to members. So you get 4 minutes. That includes questions and answers. Please allow time for the secretary to give you a reply. Mr. Chen Hockfeng.
Thank you, Chairman. I hope that the Secretary can help us clarify some of the news report I have seen in the last couple of days, as it seems to state that the landlords of SDUs are victims because they actually partition off 7 SDUs in one unit, but then with the BHU requirement, then the 7 units would then have to become 3, and that would force an increase in rent and tenants to move out. I would like you to clarify because in my understanding, the standards of 8 square meters is actually not legislated yet. I'm sure that there is still room for discussion. Let's say if some of the owners are already renovating it according to your standards, they might just be wasting their money because the standards has not yet been fixed. And the reports from the news actually are forcing tenants to move out. How can you ensure that you can protect the tenants, that tenants are not forced out due to unreasonable causes? How can you protect the tenants of the SDUs? Or for a 40 square feet unit, I don't think you should allow people to live in such a small area. We really must try to clarify. We want people to live in appropriate housing. Well, you have handled the SDU situation, and then now you are allowing BHUs. So next we'll need to look into the hostels or guest houses, because now without SDUs, people are not able to rent SDUs and they would have to go for guest houses or even for bed spaces. And that actually would make people go for even worse housing surroundings. We don't want to see people moving to even worse living environments after this. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Chen. Well, you actually have raised a very important point from the perspective of landlords. We do not want grassroots citizens to live in a windowless box-like room and that the toilet may be right next to the bed with very poor hygienic environment. We want landlords actually to have ethics and moral to allow people to live in respected areas. We're actually proposing basic requirements. We are not actually enforcing the size of the window. We just want people to live in areas in which they could feel basic respect. What we're proposing now of a floor area of at least 8 square meters and with a window, this is what we feel that this is requirements. These are humane requirements, but we will of course in December discuss with the panel and also kick off a consultation to look into these requirements. And of course, there is still room for changes made to these requirements. I've already given an answer in response to Mr. Vincent Cheng on tenants. We do have a tenancy control and agreement to protect the rights of the tenants, and if you think there is a need, you can actually also complain to the RBD. For the bed spaces and guest houses, in our task force on SDUs, we do have representatives from different departments. I know that the Culture and Tourism and Sports Bureau is also very concerned with the requirements of the SDUs, and they would, of course, also review the bed spaces and guest houses under such guidelines. Mr. Michael Tan, thank you. Since I've taken up this line of work, I've always done my best to monitor the government. Some people say that I'm always criticizing the government. That is because if I think that there are blind spots or inadequacies from the end of the government, I hope we could come to some solutions. And sometimes if I believe that the government is doing something suitable and appropriate, yet being criticized by the public, I would also speak up for the government. I've looked at the case you mentioned. The landlord has rented the place out to a second landlord, and he has only taken it back because the lease is up and has not forced the tenants to move out. Well, I think the landlord may want to make renovations. And actually, we see that there are about 10% of such SDUs with a subletting. About 60,000 of the SDUs do not comply to standards, and so there would always be a need for SDU because some people live alone and some of them do not have full-time job, and some people really like living in these areas because they have friends. I think many of such people are those ineligible for PRH, and there may be around 40,000 people who may never become eligible for PRH. That would lead to long-term demand. Well, you said that out of the 110,000, there are about 70,000 units that may only need minor adjustments made to the units. Well, if that's the case, then that may lead to a drop in rent because there would then be 77,000 BHUs for 44,000 people. I actually, at this time, am more concerned with the 30,000 substandard SDUs. If my figures are correct, then with 77,000 supply for the demand of 44,000 people, then why would I need to invest money to renovate the units? I would I would say that the 30,000 substandard units would sort of disappear along the way. Well, I think that you are now able to do that you will be able to remove all substandard housing. Well, by the year 2027, would you be able to would you have enough transitional housing for these people to move into? That's the main question here now. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Tian. Let us first take a look at the timetable, because I think we all know the general picture that in future there would be 70,000, 80,000 units for about 44,000 people. let's say that we first need registration. We recommend a year or year and a half for registration. Then registered owners would receive a grace period. Some people think that 1 year is enough. Some say that we need to consider 1.5 to 2 years. We are inclined towards a longer grace period. Well, let's say it's 1 year registration and then 2 year in grace period. Then the grace period would end around end of 2028. For landlords who do not comply to our guidelines, by the end of 2028, there would be a rise in the supply of PRH units. We're talking about yearly annual supply about 30,000 per year. The supply will continue to rise after 5 years. That is the reason why we say that most important is to have adequate supply, because with adequate supply, more people would have moved up to PRH units, and with transitional housing and the BHUs, after 26, 27, there will still be 5 years of BHUs, and with 30,000 BHU units, those would still be in operation, and that would be our supply until the end of the grace period. Even after the grace period, when we enforce legislation, we would still hold discretion. We are going to be risk-based, and even for the same group of units, we are still going to gradually replace them step by step. Mr. Yang Wen-kit. Thank you, Chairman. Well, although I know that we are going to discuss BHUs at our next meeting, I promised my community that I would ask this question. There's actually that landlords are allowed to sublet to tenants who are waiting to move up to PRH, and that even with the premium unpaid. So these people would be living in an individual room with a shared kitchen and bathrooms. There are many universities in the Kowloon City District, and many university students rent a room, and then within the tenancy agreement, the student is allowed to sublet to other people. So they share the unit and share bathroom. Would they be contravening the law in future? I'm not sure whether you're able to give me an answer today. You should consider all these aspects. Or otherwise, if under the housing society, even if it is allowed to sublet a unit, then they may actually be breaching the law. And even for some which provide guest houses or vacation homes, they may be subletting it to people with providing shared bathrooms. So these are some of the policies you would need to make clear. Well, I'm happy to hear that Choi Hong Estate will be redeveloping soon. Ma To Wai Estate is much older, and even though it was announced that there would be redevelopment, the details have not yet been made public. So there will be about 680 units to be provided for those affected under the redevelopment of Ma To Wai Estate, but there are over 2,000 households there. you are thinking about renovating or redeveloping them in phases, but then there is not enough supply for the tenants. Have you considered actually using the URA project in Sheng Duck Street to reprovision for the Ma Chao Wai estate, and so the entire estate can be reprovisioned over to Sheng Duck Street in one batch, and that actually could help us enhance the speed and efficiency of redevelopment.
I thank Mr. Yang for his questions. Mr. Yang cited an example. I want to comment on that. Say a landlord rents out a unit that would not be subject to the rules about the basic housing units. BHUs apply to subdivided units. When that unit is in the same state as in the plan approved by the housing authority, the letting of that unit will not be subject to the rules about BHUs. Now, on redeveloping Ma Chao Wai Estate and Sai Wan Estate, we will announce the details next year. On the rehousing estates and the other points raised by Mr. Yang, we will give thought to those suggestions. Of course, it would be great if we could move all residents in one go. Some people wonder why it takes so long to redevelop Choi Hong Estate. That's because the decanting estate can only take up part of the residents, maybe a third at a time. So Oak Estate took shorter to redevelop because we had enough units. So it's all about the capacity of the decanting estate or rehousing estate. I want to ride on the point about BHUs. I'm not asking about renting out the same unit that the landlord first bought. I'm asking about people subdividing their unit. A landlord stays in the 700 feet, but then there were subsequent changes to the unit. The unit becomes a 2-bedroom unit. So let's give some thought to this kind of unit. Mr. Tony Tan. The policy address this year has adopted many suggestions from different industries and the public. I have some observations. People are concerned about public finances. In terms of the fiscal sustainability, where public housing is concerned, what are the government's ideas on this? Each public rental housing flat costs $800,000. How do we keep the running of PRH flats financially sustainable? That's a question for the Secretary. Now, on phasing out substandard SDUs, I'm from the surveying, architecture, and landscaping sector. Professionals will have to be hired to confirm the compliance of new basic housing units with the new rules. And I'm sure the government will consider the professional qualifications and experience when professionals are involved, and there will be a demand for such professionals. Fees will be one factor to consider. Property management can play a great role. The government should step up collaboration with property management firms, such as an initiative of having a single property management company look after several housing blocks. On the management of public housing estates, now we use technology for building, such as MIC. We use new materials. But then in property management, the government should lead by example by adopting AI-based technologies in public housing. That's to set an example for the management of private flats. Now, I turn to the long-term housing strategy. The latest report just came out. The focus now is on the quantity of flats. There are measures to boost quality too. Quality matters. The size of flats matters. I would like to see a per capita living space in the future. Please consider this idea in the future. So 4 questions for the Secretary. I can see the member has raised some interrelated questions. On one point, I do agree with the member. We have many projects under us. We need to keep this housing project financially sustainable. We have to ensure cost effectiveness in building and also building maintenance and management. Financial sustainability needs to be honored in all those tasks. As we build many flats, we hope we can lower the average cost. Now, workers are aging. The same goes for cleaners and security guards. Robotics can help. We also want to enhance the well-being of workers through greater use of robotics. There is a real need we manage many public flats, and we should indeed adopt more smart initiatives. We're happy to work with the sector. There are things private flats are doing that are worth learning. That way, we can keep enhancing estate management. Now, on basic housing units, we will need professionals to help out. There will be a registration period for BHUs. During that period, some landlords may think their unit meet the minimum requirements. In that case, they can hire professionals for the certification. Now, on what the professionals are expected to do and what kind of helpers these professionals can get, we will welcome any suggestion from the industry through Mr. Tony Tse. Now, surveyors, architects, and engineers will be able to help to offer certification. So altogether, there will be thousands of professionals. Not every such professional will be offering certification, but we believe there will be enough resources. On the details, we will welcome suggestions from the member. Now, on the LTHS, indeed, we also focus on quality. We have the well-being design. On whether we can build larger public flats, we do have some plans. Towards the latter part of the next 10-year period, we want to increase the flat size by 10%, and we will keep adjusting this size based on the supply of public housing. Dr. So Chun-Wing. The latest policy address offers many inspiring initiatives. Most eye-catching are the housing measures. Now, in the next 5 years, we will see an extra 189,000 public flats waiting time for public housing will be down to 4.5 years. The government is so confident because we have found land, and that's down to the efforts of the government. Basic housing units will be vital to our effort to end subdivided units. That's why so many members have questions about BHUs. The Secretary has come prepared. She has been able to answer our questions. Now, certain things will be complicated. There were 110,000 subdivided unit households. She said no more than 10% of those units are windowless units. I know the government has done its research. Now, BHUs will need a window. There will have to be separate washrooms with ventilation and fire safety requirements. You put everything together, you may find more than just 30,000 substandard SDUs. So that will require further investigation. So I invite the government to consider whether you will end up with more substandard SDUs once you put all those minimum requirements together. Can we be more flexible with the requirement about a separate washroom? I'm not saying you should do it, but I'm saying once you have all those standards, you put them together. The renovations required may leave many people homeless. So there will be a legislative time frame, there will be a grace period, there will be more public housing supply. Some of those 110,000 SDU households, in fact 70,000 of them will move on to public housing flats. I agree. But another issue comes up. How do we build public flats faster? I know you have been working on it. Money is tight, manpower is tight. So can the government be more targeted in its efforts? So can we fix SDUs? Can we build faster? We need to get the priorities right. Sorry, Dr. So, you have used all your time. There's no time for the Secretary. Just a brief response will do. I thank Dr. So for his question. We need enough land, and then we can boost housing supply. We receive support from many bureaus, Development Bureau, Transport and Logistics Bureau. We need this concerted effort. And because of that concerted effort, we can now offer an extra 189,000 public flats in the next 5 years. Now, we did consider the impact of having multiple requirements. Most subdivided units fall short of the standards because of the size. There may be 20 or so % of the units fall short of requirements because of size. Now, we will require a smoke detector. The Fire Services Department told us that detector costs hundreds of dollars. The detector can be powered by batteries. You just put that on the wall. You don't even need a power cord. Or take a fire extinguisher. It costs below $1,000. You put an extinguisher in the communal area, and that will do. As for the fire safety door, you just have to replace that door. That door may cost thousands of dollars. So those requirements are not particularly challenging. The power companies and the water services department told us it doesn't cost much to install separate water and electricity meters. Separate washrooms may be tricky. More than 90% of the units meet the requirement. But the tricky part lies with the wall, because not every unit has a wall that goes from the floor to the ceiling in separating the washroom. So we will be doing extra work before we finalize on the requirements for BHUs. The housing department is working on increasing public housing supply, and that covers advanced allocation and building public flats. We have kept reminding ourselves to do better. We work against the clock in boosting the supply of public rental flats.
Sir Andrew Lam. Thank you, Chairman. I've always been following up on the SDU issue, but I know that there would be a more thorough discussion, so I'm not going to delve into detail here. I'll just like to mention a few figures. Well, many of the people rent SDUs because of low rent. Let me use the 2021 government report as reference. In the report, we see two set of figures. In the 2016, we're talking about 12% people living within 7 square meters. But then in 2022, we're talking about 21%. So there's actually a huge discrepancy. 7 to 13 square meters, 66.9%. And then for 8 square meters, square feet, they're talking about 26%. There are some other figures I would like to state. PRH is very important. If you look at private housing rental, it actually went up from 8.9% to 15.4%. The private housing market is also very important in Hong Kong. At the same time, grassroots families spending on rent, you can see an increase from 20% to 60% of their income. And then for smaller size units, we're talking about an increase in rent as well. So we really should not overestimate. In recent days, we've seen what the landlords have done, and I hope that the government will continue to follow up on the rent. I know that you have done a lot, but we really must be prudent. For grassroots households, they spend a lot on housing. Well, a few $100s means that they would just have to spend less on food allowance. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Lam, for raising this point. We are very concerned with the tenancy agreement of the SDUs. We have collected information on rent, and we continue to ensure transparency of the rent. And recently, we've seen that the average rent has dropped from 5,500 to 5,200. It's just a slight drop, and it differs from each district. And there's also difference in New Territories, Kowloon, and Hong Kong Island. Oh, there are many changes. We will continue to pay attention to the rent, and we will be very careful in the way going forward. Ms. Carmen Ken. Thank you, Chairman. I know that there will be a discussion on BHUs next month. However, I'd just like to reflect some of my views on that. Also, personally, I express support for the BHUs. With the tenancy control and under the foundation of having a separate water and electric meter, I believe that this is the basic requirement we can accept. Drawing up legislation together with a registration system is a very good idea, and we should actually try to complete registration as soon as possible. With registration, we'll be able to know how many up to par standards there are. The million-dollar question here right now is how long the grace period would be. I believe that this is interactive between supply and demand. As the Secretary said, 70% of them need no changes. Well, let's say 60% of people are eligible to move up to PRH, then it would depend on whether the TH and the BHU will be able to absorb the remaining percentage of people living in SDUs. And for the 40%, we're talking about 40,000 households that are eligible for PRH. They would still need the BHUs, and we just need to consider the factors behind that. I hope that the administration could prepare more information for us in the next meeting on BHUs. I am in support of raising the rent for the well-off tenants because that would actually help us with the ratio in the GSH and the white form secondary market, or for green forms for holders, and they would find it easier to move up to PRH. Of course, some people are asking whether you are just encouraging people to lie flat and not to do anything. I think that with this 5:5 ratio, more well-off tenants will be able to move to HOS. Since there are some with extra ballots, let's say that those 40 or under would have an extra ballot. Those who have gone for 2 consecutive times could also get an extra ballot. Could you actually also provide an extra ballot for well-off tenants? So that's a question and also a suggestion. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Khan, for supporting our well-off tenants policies. We're actually encouraging people to move up because we want PRH to be kept for the less well-off tenants. We hope that people would be interested in our SSF. We would also increase the quota for the secondary market so that we could see a more healthy housing ladder for all. With the ratio of green phone and white phone from 60-40 moving to 50-50 ratio, we're actually giving more opportunities and encouraging people to move up the ladder. Well, in the next 5 years, there would be about 40,000 SSF, and people seeing such a stable supply, and with an extra ballot, it would encourage young people to better plan for the future. As long as there are ample quantities, then we would be able to see a moving up of the housing ladder. Our chairman, well-off tenants, some of them are paying 150 times the rent, and but some of them should actually be moving out of PRH. We should provide them with incentive to move out of their PRH and to purchase their own flat instead. Mr. Leung Man Kwong. Thank you, Chairman. The Chief Executive's policy address has come up with a pragmatic housing policy. I'd like to share with you a case. I actually want to commend the housing department because last week we saw a tenant that lives on the rooftop, and the tenant is being forced to move out, and he didn't know that he is eligible for transitional housing. And the Housing Bureau was able to identify suitable transitional housing for him within 1 day. That means that many people have no idea that there is such a thing as transitional housing. We need to ensure that such information could be passed along to the public. So for those with housing imminent needs, they could then choose to go for transitional housing. Many of these families and households are concerned with how much money they are using in transportation. They want to know how much they could save. I think we should provide more information to the public, especially in the future for the basic housing units. I'd also like to touch on the well-off tenants policies. Well, as we're talking about quite a large number of well-off tenants, we must take this step by step and not make changes immediately. For a household of 4, when their household income reaches a certain number, then I agree that we should encourage them from upscale mobility. We should provide them with incentives to help them move up the housing ladder. But then within the well-off tenants, what I see most are actually a 2-person household, probably siblings living together. Their assets may be within $2 million. One may be better off and one less well off. You can't really force them to go for SSF. That's not a good policy, because the person less well off may need to go for basic housing unit if you force them to leave the PRH. So we really need to concern ourselves with the different family structures. to avoid cases in which we need to force one person from a household to move into the BHUs. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Leung. On your case study sharing on SDUs and PRH. Well, these are real-life cases in which that could help us plan better in our policies. The transitional housing should needs to be explained in detail, and that takes a lot of manpower. When we receive such cases by the social workers or by the district offices, I'm not asking those working in the community living room colleagues to help us advertise it. We just want them to help us explain this idea. I'd like to take this opportunity for those who are choosing transitional housing. They're actually subsidies under the care teams. So if they need help with relocation or they need help with transport subsidy, then they can actually apply for this under the Community Care Fund. Well, from many surveys, we see many households after moving to TH, they are better taken care of. 90% of them feel much happier, and children who move there actually find it much happier living there. 80% of the children find it happier to meet new friends, to play with other people, and living in better environment. So I hope that the social workers can help us provide the details to those in need. For the well-off tenants policies, we want it to be fair and to take care of those households as well.
Mr. Gary Zhang, I want to follow up on the well-off tenants policy. The focus in the community has been on fairness. Public rental housing is not just a lifeline, but it's also about upward mobility. Now, we leave aside those involving falsification of documents. When a PRH tenant becomes rich enough to be counted as a well-off tenant, that's a success story. So we shouldn't be punitive in what we do. The focus should be helping tenants who have acquired greater means to move up the housing ladder. So we need the focus to be on helping people leave PRH flats and move on to the next rung up the housing ladder. So I would like to see the focus on this. So we shouldn't just be looking at punitive measures or fair use of resources. Now, we have seen great results with public housing, and that's inspiring. So subsidized sale flats will be another focus. The policy address this year proposes changes, changing the ratio from 70-30 to 60-40. Young applicants will also get an extra ballot number for SSFs. Have we projected the figures? So if we adjust the split and when we give the extra ballot numbers, will we have a projection of what will happen after these changes? Now, about the WSM scheme, there's a quota on the WSM scheme. The annual limit is 4,500 places. do we have a plan to enhance the turnover in this market? Will we also be considering relaxing the restrictions? I'm talking about the schemes with premium unpaid. When you have the quota, you're still restricting the market. Secretary. I thank Mr. Zhang for his questions. Indeed, each part of the housing market is linked with each other. We have to take a more macro view. We look at the housing ladder. Some measures were proposed in the last policy address. This year's policy address has measures targeted at subsidized sale flats. There are changes to the split, an extra ballot number for young applicants. Now, we're also proposing a longer mortgage default guarantee period and a maximum mortgage repayment period. That also frees up more flats in the WSM market. Now, in the latest report from under the long-term housing strategy, there are two more features apart from supply-led and flexibility. This time, there's also a focus on the housing ladder. Each part of the housing ladder has implications for other parts, so we have to keep enhancing the entire ladder. We have to make good use of the existing resources in terms of public housing. We combat tenancy abuse. We want a better well-off tenant policy. We want to encourage people to move up the housing ladder, and these things go into what Mr. Zhang just said. Now, on the secondary market for HOS scheme flats, we propose an extra 1,500 places. All of that will go to young applicants for HOS flats. So we want to speed up turnover in that market. The mortgage default guarantee can help people take out a 90% guarantee or even a 95% mortgage home loan when it's a GSH flat. Now it's my turn. I have two concerns. First, home ownership for young people. Now, young people will get an extra ballot number for HOS flats. Now, we already have a projection for the next 10 years housing supply. This means no extra supply. We want young people to own their homes faster. That will mean some on the waiting list will see their chances taken away. So can we find flats Of course, you want to have different streams in your quota system. You want young people to save money, rent a unit, and eventually buy a unit. That would mean fewer young people relying on PRH flats and HOS flats. You don't want young people foregoing promotion or pay rises just to stay within the income limit for PRH flats. Now, can the government tell us with greater clarity, does the government want entire families to stay within the same PRH flat, or does the government want families to split into smaller households, leading to greater demand for PRH flats? Clarity is needed here. We want seniors to be taken care of by their family members. But this well-off tenant policy is getting restrictive, and family members will have to live apart So can the government tell us what the thinking behind these policies is? Thank you. We propose giving young applicants an extra ballot number for HOS scheme flats. Now, we did a projection based on the sale exercise of HOS flats 2023. When young applicants get an extra ballot number, their chances are improved by 40%. Now, for applicants who fail 2 times in a row, their chances are improved by 50%. Now, for young applicants who fail to buy a flat 2 times in a row, these people get 2 extra numbers. So they will see an improvement of 60% in their chances for an HOS flat. And some people good at math may see that an applicant's chances will improve by 70 or 80% when they keep failing to buy an HOS flat. Now, we take a very scientific approach to our long-standing long-term housing strategy. We go on the Census and Statistics Department's figures. The CNSD has figures on births and deaths and also age demographics, changes in households. The government also has a range of talent admission figures. All those figures are incorporated in our long-term housing strategy. We say the supply will be 308,000 flats. This figure has also factored in people now in inadequate housing. So we're not saying some parts of the supply come at the expense of other parts. So we will be adjusting different forms of flats. Some political parties have argued for a youth saving scheme for home ownership. That proposal came from the FTU. We've been looking at how the finances work. We look at how the scheme can work, how that ties in with housing supply. We keep an open mind, but it will take time to look into such proposals. Now, on whether we encourage families to stay with their elderly members or whether we encourage family members to live apart, the government cannot tell the community what to do. We want people to look after senior family members. That's why people get priority when the family applicant includes senior family members. That's a clear direction. But then you also have community trends. Now, some people stay with their parents until marriage. But now, young people, even unmarried young people, want to live on their own, apart from their parents. That's a change in the community. We have to factor in these trends. We take into account these factors in our long-term housing strategy. We will be mindful of such changes, and then we adjust our strategy to cater to such needs. Now, speaking for the second round, we do have time for that. We have up to 4:30 p.m. So the same time limit for Dr. Wendy Hong. Thank you, Chairman. Now, I have a question about rehousing estate. In Hongshui-Q, Hachun, there's a new development area. There is a rehousing estate that involves 375 units for rent and 300 units bought by people. Now, there are 8 rehousing estates with 6,700 units. Is there a separate tally for the 7,700 rehousing estates? Now, there will be 55,000 SSFs in the next 10 years. Now, for rehousing estates, there are no asset tests. So I just want to find out what the situation is like for the rehousing estates. The rehousing estates fall under the Development Bureau. We support that bureau's work. Now, my colleague, Mr. Ng, can tell us more about that.
For the long-term housing strategy on supply, we've said that we will make an assessment. Well, Dr. Hong is talking about the dedicated rehousing estates, the DRE, and the supply of the next 10 years. We have included that within our consideration. We have also considered these in our supply. Ms. Carmen Ken, thank you. I'd like to ask about the abuse of PRH and also sustainable finance. I think that I need to say that I'm actually a member of the Housing Authority. Well, we have actually used the PRH rental fee for about 16 years, and we have seen that there's actually a deficit, that even with the subsidy, there is still about a 500 million deficit. One is on some of the elements in the adjustments. Of course, we understand that we need to look into percentage, but we also need to look into the factors behind it. And then for the HOS, currently, we would look at the affordability test. We don't consider the construction cost or the interest cost. I also think that we should actually move along with the times, especially since we want to enhance the housing ladder. I don't see a lot mentioned in the policy address this time. Is this actually a recurrent policy? So that's why it's not put in our policy address. I am happy to see that we're actually going to how to ensure that we do have well-off tenants policies. And also the Cherished Public Housing Resources Award Scheme. Well, I agree that this should not be non-anonymous. Would you actually consider not disclosing the whistleblower or other policies like that? Secretary. I'd like the PS to take the question. Thank you. Well, as a member of the Housing Authority, you should know that within our Finance Committee, we have made discussions, and the direction is just as Ms. Khan said. When we are going to adjust the rent, in the past, we would provide some sort of subsidies. In the future, we would need to take into consideration the financial situation and whether we are capable of affording all such subsidies. The PRH rent adjustment would also take into account the income of the tenants. We cannot just increase the rent when income is not rising. We actually connected with the affordability of the tenants. There is not much connection with market trends. we need to be very prudent in taking this forward. I'd like to thank Ms. Khan for supporting the Cherished Public Housing Resources Award scheme. Well, in some people liked our previous award as the Good Citizen Award, which was used earlier. At the award ceremony, we usually would invite the awardee to be commended and share their stories. But for this scheme, we would still want to share the story, however, without disclosing whose story it belongs to. Today, there are still whistleblowers who do that via different channels. We would ask the whistleblower to see whether they're willing to participate in the Cherished Public Housing Resources Award scheme. If they're willing, then we would offer a reward to them. But if they're not willing to join in the scheme and do not want to receive a reward, we still would investigate the tenancy abuse. There are still 2 members who wish to speak. Mr. Kwok Wai Keung is speaking for the first time. Let's take these 2 last questions because time is almost up. Mr. Kwok Wai Keung. Thank you, Chairman. On tenancy abuse, of course, it's an incentive with rewards. For the non-anonymous citizens, must they be tenants? Because the property management companies would be actually clearer about the situation. Can they actually provide intelligence as well? And maybe the reported household was reported by more than one household because of a high profile. So would the 3,000 reward be shared amongst the whistleblowers, or would it be first come, first serve? I'm afraid that there might be arguments rising out of that. The housing authority would often allow those in line for new territories to move their ballot to the urban areas. But people do not understand that the queue in the urban areas is very long and that supply is few. They might think that it's a good idea to switch to another district and that the waiting time would be an average of 5 years, but then it may actually lengthen the waiting time to 8 to 9 years. I explained to them that there are no new housing estates in the urban areas. The new housing supply are often in the new territories area. But then the problem is they already have transferred their ballot over to the urban area. We need to make sure that information is clear, that how the housing supply is in the urban area in the new territories. Otherwise, people won't know where they should put their name in or which queue they should put their names in. I'd like to defer to PS for these questions. Thank you, Mr. Kwok, for your questions. The Terrace Public Housing Resources Award Scheme is the second step. Mr. Kwok is correct. The property management company has a lot of information. Currently, we do have a cleaning company and property management company working for the PRH. They can actually take one step further and provide concrete intelligence for reporting tenancy abuse. If they do that, we actually would award them with extra points in their next tender. There are about 40 units that have been recovered through this channel. I have to clarify that the whistleblowers are not limited to PRH tenants. Some of the cases are actually reported by relatives. Let's say a few people report the same household at the same time. Well, this is not a first come, first serve competition. If all of them are providing concrete intelligence, for each case, we would have a team led by a panel, led by a directorate grade officer to follow the case, and then they would then come up with suggestions. For complicated cases, it may even be followed through by a higher grade officer. So this is not like a first come, first serve competition. Many PRH applicants when they put in the application, we would let them know that the queue for PRH housing in urban areas is very long, and that there is more supply in the new territories and in the new extended urban areas. So we see that with more and more supply in housing, we are confident that by 2026 to 2027, the composite waiting time could be reduced to 4.5 years. Mr. Kwok asked us whether we could provide information with the PRH supply. We do that. In the first 5 years of construction, we would make public how big the construction site is, the number of units to be constructed. All this could be used as conference. And in the second 5 years, that is the planning stage, then only the land parcels would be made public. The average waiting time will shorten in the next few years. So that is what is very clear at the moment. Mr. Gary Zhang, I would like to ask about the quota for the White Foam secondary market. The quota has been extended to 6,000. Well, it first started with 3,000 and then 4,000 and now to 6,000. How did we come up to this number? My understanding is that a quota is in place because we are afraid that there are too many applicants and we do not have adequate supply in the secondary market. So that's probably the consideration for such a quota. So when will the market be opened up? because one person can only purchase one unit or one flat. So when can this become sort of like a free market and that there would not be so many restrictions?
Secretary, this quota is fluid. We look at the market response and the response from the community. We set the quota at 4,500 places. The uptake was just half that level. So we thought maybe we could just stop at 4,500 places. But then we now have the well-off tenants policy. We are looking for opportunities outside PRH flats. So as part of a package of measures, we propose more places. Some people propose 10,000 places under the WSM scheme. As Mr. Zhang said, we set a quota because as with an open market with keen competition, prices are driven up. So we strike a balance here. So this time we propose an extra 1,500 places, taking the total to 6,000 places. We will keep an eye on market movements such as transaction volume. We will look at the uptake. We stay flexible with that system. So that concludes item 3 today. We now come to any other business. That's item 4. Any other business? If not, I will adjourn the meeting here. Thank you.